Hey everyone, this is the Untangled podcast, where we explore how plausible an obscure alternative reality really is. 100 years ago, space travel was just science fiction, but it's commonplace today. Can the same happen to other things we consider science fiction today, like time travel? Today, we'll take a brief look at time travel, what it is, the actual science behind it, and then some cases of people who may have time traveled. And, of course, we'll finish up by taking a deep dive at the most famous time traveler of all, John Titor. Before we get into it, I want to quickly ask you to like, subscribe, and share the episode if you enjoyed. We appreciate it. And without much further ado, let's do some time traveling. Well, welcome everybody back to our beautiful episode, and Happy New Year to everybody. Merry Christmas. It's a great new year to be alive, and yeah, let's get into it. I'm running out of intros to do. Han, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
Do I have to introduce myself every time? It's like episode 6 or 7, right?
I'm leaving that in, by the way.
Yes, that's all right. Hi guys, I'm Han. I'm still living in the Netherlands, and I'm still doing an internship for anyone who's listened to a previous episode. And I'm joining Simon to talk about his weird little escapades. Basically.
It's your weird little escapades too.
But I'm sure.
How was your winter break, Han? Because I know you were a bit more adventurous than I was, because I just sat in Brussels. What did you do?
I went to Oslo to visit a friend, and I'd never been to Scandinavia. I've never gone to a cold country anyway. This is probably the first time I stepped out of an airplane and it was actually colder than where I came from. Because usually I just go to a nice warm place and swim and stuff. But this time I went sledding, which was amazing. Every bone in my body hurt the next day and 3 days after too, because there's just so many bumps in the road. But it was great. I kind of appreciate snow now.
I mean, as a semi-Canadian myself, or Canadian,
I love acknowledging the fact that you're a semi-Canadian. That's good.
Character development.
Exactly. It's your arc.
But talking about full Canadians, I assume at this point, I'm joined today by a good friend of mine, Matt. Tell us about yourself, Matt. Who are you? How do you find yourself here today?
Hi, well, my name is Matt. I mean, I think I found myself by virtue of knowing you, Simon, but I am indeed a full-blooded Canadian, both East and West Coast sides. I know Simon since we both went to university together, the University of Waterloo. We took, I think, pretty much, very similar degrees, but we're in quite a fair number of classes. And right now, I work as an associate at a Crown Corporation, but I work basically in development. And right now I'm located just outside of Toronto. I'm basically just working, learning, deciding what I want to do next in my life. And Simon invited me onto this podcast to talk about conspiracy theories, which I'll admit is not my most vested interest, but I do think I like to always dabble and expand my hobbies. So I'm very excited to talk about whatever it is we're talking about today. So thank you for having me on, Simon.
No worries. It's always a great way to keep up with people and, reconnect, because, I mean, we're so far away now and everything. But regardless, you say you're not too much of a conspiracy person yourself. Where do you fall, I guess? Rate yourself as a conspiratorial person from 1 to 10, 1 being anything that happens out there is the complete truth as I see it, and 10 as in you believe the Earth is actually very vertically flat in appearance.
I mean, probably like a 5 or a 6. And I think that's because, like, I don't dispute that there are probably things that have gone differently than what the traditional or popular narrative is. I just think that some of the theories that I see are just so infeasible that I like simple. Like if there's an alternative version or alternative like happenstance, and you're able to explain that, and you don't have to rely on so many what ifs to do that, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll take that. Like, that's plausible. So probably, yeah, like a 5 or a 6. Like, the Earth is not vertically flat. I think we've done enough in the space races and ages to disprove that. But, maybe there are some things that like we just can't explain, or that just happen differently. So
you're kind of skeptical, but still Occam's razor based guy. Just nice.
Yeah, so I'll put it this way. I'm willing to believe, and maybe I'll say I will, that certain sci-fi movies were contracted by the government to condition to condition us to believe that to condition us that when extraterrestrials came to Earth that we'd be okay with it. Like that, I think could be plausible. You know what? Like that makes sense. Like the government has a lot of many governments have a lot of vested interest in the entertainment district. They sign off on a lot of things. I could believe that, right? Americans faked the moon landing to beat the Russians in the space race. I don't think so. Like, there's so many millions of dollars invested in that. So much government, involved. So many people involved. I don't buy that one. That's kind of where I land. If that's a good nutshell.
Probably going to get to the moon landing one later at a later date, I think. So.
Yeah, my hope is like at like important milestones, maybe like the 10th episode, like 15th or 20th, would do like really big ones. I think that'd be really fun, right, Han?
Yeah. I mean, this is a big one, and then we end at 9/11.
Oh my god!
Yeah, we've been talking about that because we don't.
That's
want to
a great way to end
political.
your podcast. Intentionally or otherwise, just talk about just close the book right there. But my suggestion for the moon one, I would say, look at the Twitter comments from like the last year or two, because this keeps on getting brought up on Twitter, and every single time it does, there are always comments, people being like, "Well, like, what if like it was actually faked?" And like, like we just don't know. I encourage you guys to like pull those up, because it's really interesting to see that like there is still a lot of public discourse over that one, and maybe it's worth looking into deeper or not.
I've looked into it a bit deeper. I'm just going to say that there's a nice few documentaries. It's going to be a good episode, is all I'll say.
It should be, 100%.
But to pivot back to what we'll talk about today, I'm going to start by what will be our icebreaker, despite our 5 minutes of rambling. Did you make any New Year's resolutions?
More rambling.
It's a new year. New you, new me. Come on, Han. You must have made something. You're a man who needs some self-improvement, right?
Oh, Oi. No, I don't actually do New Year's resolutions, because I feel like New Year's resolutions are a good way to hype yourself up for something and then disappoint yourself in a span of 2 or 3 weeks and then give yourself a bad start of the year. So maybe that's too pessimistic, but that's
maybe your resolution should be to find a resolution.
That's my resolution for this year, is to find a resolution for 2023.
My resolution, I've made 2. My first one is not to insult Han when I'm looking for segues to other things. That's my first one for this podcast. I've noticed I've been doing that once or twice, so apologies, Han. That officially starts the next episode. I'm pretending we're filming this before the new year.
Of course you are.
And I just want to keep... My goal is to have 2 episodes out a month of this podcast for the entire year. That's my resolution. But Matt, what about you? What are your resolutions, if any? Or do you abide by that mindset?
So I'm a big fan of not going by a New Year's resolution. I'm a big fan of habit building. So I think a lot of resolutions can be formulated by just like building smaller habits. So, but I think for me, like I found that that's a lot easier. Especially in my life, because I used to get very obsessed with like, I have to do this by X date, or I have to do this by the end of the year. And most of the time, I find I just get discouraged. So like one of my resolutions this year is to get better at art, like digital art specifically, because that's not something I have ever been very good at. I do a lot of it in music. I do a lot in writing. I've always neglected art, because I was like, if I can be good at, or decently okay at 2 out of 3 art mediums, then I don't need to do the third one. But then my other side of the brain that likes to do everything says, well, no, you can do all 3. You just have to teach yourself. So, so my, maybe my New Year's resolution is to basically, get something a little bit more, portfolio wise. Yeah.
I guess, are there any resolutions you've ever made, not to get too long of an answer, but that you wish you'd accomplished, that you wish you could do anything to like go back and see yourself fulfill that you'd give anything up for? Any regrets we have on that cosmic sense?
Oh yeah, I wish I could go back to when I was like 10 or 11 and like be a lot better at snowboarding. For a long time, I always regretted not being an Olympic snowboarder. And I know that like that's something that like grizzled old men say, like, oh, I wish I was like on the NFL team. But like it's true. Like you look at all the kids that come out of like the US and Canada, and even like Japan and Korea, like they're like 14, 15, and they're like competing for gold medal tourneys. It's very interesting to me. But yeah, if I could go back and become like a world star athlete in like a winter sport, definitely snowboarding, I would do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're only a few years away from commercial time travel. So you have a chance, right?
Yeah, I'll pay whatever money. I don't, I'll do it.
Nah, but I was hoping that was a better segue to our topic today. Today we're going to be talking about, drum roll please, time travel and John Titor, the world's most famous and best time traveler. Any thoughts on this, Han? Because you are going in this completely blind. How do you
Well,
like this topic? Is this a conspiracy for you?
well, I do like time travel because I've watched and read and seen a lot of sci-fi, but I mean, is it gonna be a Back to the Future time travel, or is it gonna be like an Endgame time travel? That's what I'm wondering.
Oh, I think you'll be very
It's gonna
impressed because I've done the research on this. I've done the scientific research on
right.
this, and I'll show you how it's plausible, how you can do it, and I'll show you, demonstrate you people who have done it before, which is what we all need.
Yeah, wibbly wobbly timey wimey,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly that.
Well, to quickly sum up, I'm not going to sum up what time travel is. We'll get into that maybe a bit more into, I guess, in the next few minutes. But basically, this guy showed up on some internet web forums, the most reputable place to show up, and was like, hey, yo, I'm a time traveler from 2036. Ask me anything. And his ideas and thoughts just kind of made sense a bit. That's what we're looking at today in a one-sentence summary. And we're going to see how feasible it is that time travelers exist and that he was a real time traveler. So, Matt, have you come into contact with this theory before? And if you have, what are your thoughts on it? What would you rate this out of our tried and trusty scale of 1 being completely believable to 10 being completely unbelievable? Ready, sit.
Okay, so I have, and this is going to be a really nerdy answer. So if anyone who listens to this knows this, I commend you. The John Titor theory is a big plot point in this anime series and visual novel called Steins Gate. I'm not sure if you heard of. Yeah, so it's a very big part of that. And what I love about like games like this and stuff from like the early 2000s, especially time stuff, is that these creators will pull the weirdest theories, like the John Titor one, pull it into fiction, and then just make a really great story out of it. So I don't know a lot about it, and probably what I do know about it is tinged with creative liberties, but. One of the things that I really liked about the theory is that it doesn't cause a lot of problems as a conspiracy theory. Like, it's just a fun story. Like, if it's real, very cool. If it's not, whatever. Like, this isn't like some harrowing, like predicting the end times Mayan 2012 calendar aspect. So if you're asking me like what I rate it, I'm willing to give this like a 4 or a 5. And that's only because if you take time at its face value of being a concept or a construct, that we actually don't need to define our reality, which sounds like a crock of shit, to be honest. But like time, you don't need time to exist in the world. Time is just what we choose to measure it. If you take that at face value, you could apply it to this theory, and honestly, like, sure, why not, right? It's very plausible that someone came from the future into 2036, said, hey, I have some like mild predictions. And it's one of the things, as I'm sure you'll touch on, that John Titor talks about, is that he says, well, like my future or my reality may not be the same as yours, so like keep that in. And I think that that's a really cool thing they add, like if it's him or whoever created this persona added, because they're basically asserting that, scientifically speaking, if multiversal, reality is a thing, then yeah, like I could have come from a reality where this is totally plausible, and I'm just trying to give you my best predictions. So I'm only give this like a 4 or a 5, because like if it's cool or if it's real, it's really cool. If it's not, it's just a fun piece of fiction. So
yeah. What about you, Han? Because I don't know how familiar you are. Are you familiar at all? And from our quick discussion right now, what do you think about this?
Well, what I'm gleaning from your discussion is that it's more of an alternate universe kind of time travel that doesn't. It's like not the Back to the Future kind. Because I recently rewatched Back to the Future. I guess that's my preparation for this one. I watched the first one, and if it wouldn't really fly with that one, would it? It wouldn't really work with that kind of time logic because it just messes up everything.
But okay,
well, we'll see. Are we going to use different definitions of time travel and see how it holds up to everyone?
We'll get into it. We'll get into it. But I feel like being more of a philosopher yourself, Han, you're more worried about the paradoxes, and that's why you're a bit more on the skeptical side, is what I'm gleaning from you here.
Yeah, basically. So I'll go a bit lower. I'll give it a 3.
Really?
So you've got some work to do.
And really quickly, just quick rating. How likely do you guys think it is that time travel can exist, just scientifically as a concept?
So, yeah, I mean, it does exist.
Okay, good.
Technically, if you've got the way that space space travel would work is that you can technically time travel, but you're only traveling forward at an increased rate. So there is a thing called time travel. Okay. Also, what we're doing right now is traveling through time. But,
exactly.
I mean, that's getting very, yeah.
What about you, Matt?
I mean, I think it's feasible. Space is weird. There's people that devote their whole lives to basically saying that space is weird, and with space comes time. But yeah, I think time travel is feasible. I just don't know to what degree it would be, and if even by 2036 or onwards, you really even had the ability to reliably go backwards and forwards. So, but yeah,
Okay.
feasible.
I think I have a good task because I'm pretty sure by the end of this podcast episode, both of you will completely believe that time travel, both back and forth into the future, is completely feasible, scientifically speaking, as well as be a bit more, accepting of the John Titor narrative.
All right, we'll see how you do.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll throw up a picture right now. For people who are listening audio, I also post YouTube and I have a few pictures on. Anyways, the beautiful guy I threw up right now, his name is Gennady Padalka. Any ideas why I threw this man's picture up?
Because he's a Russian and he's smiling? That's not very normal.
Oh, fair enough. He's actually the most time-traveled human. He has spent his big claim to fame beyond being a time traveler, which nobody recognizes beyond me, but regardless, his big claim to fame is that he spent 879 days in space, which is the longest anybody's been in space. And according to science, this means that he's about around 20 milliseconds or so traveling into the future. So the way we're going to structure this episode of our podcast, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about how time travel is possible using our current understanding of physics and kind of demonstrating the two different concepts, how forward and backward time is possible. Then after we get through the lecture or something, it's not going to take too long, I'm going to get into a few cases of people who could have time traveled or who have time traveled. And we'll finish up by a deep dive into John Titor. So before we look at time travelers, I want to give a real quick 5-minute overview of what modern science says about time travel. So basically, this is going to be a really quick mini lecture on the physics behind time travel. If you're not interested in this and just want to look at some wacky time travels with us, feel free to skip ahead to the 28-minute mark. So, for time travel, there's one name you have to know, Albert Einstein. In 1905, he published a general theory of relativity, which transformed our understanding of physics. What's notable for us looking at time travel is how his theory of relativity described time. Unlike previous theories, Einstein postulated and proved in many cases that time, much like space, can be affected by external forces. This is easiest seen for traveling forwards in time. According to the theory of relativity, certain things can make time be slower for an object, thus allowing that object to travel into the future. There are two main ways of doing this. First is speed. Simply put, the faster you travel, the slower you will experience time. This happens because speed kind of warps space-time. I'm not going to say more than that because it's kind of confusing, but trust me and Einstein on this. This effect can actually be relatively easily be proven. For instance, if we take a super precise atomic clock on a plane, we can see that it would be microseconds ahead of a clock set to the same time that did not travel on that plane. The second factor that can affect time is gravity. We all know that the stronger gravity is, the harder it is for objects to escape it. This same principle also applies to time. For the stronger gravity is, the slower time will pass for things in it compared to things outside of it. For example, imagine you're visiting a neutrino star, which is a burnt-out supergiant star. These have an enormous gravitational pull. 1 minute in that old star might be, for instance, 20 years on Earth. If you've seen the movie Interstellar, this is kind of what happens in that movie where the guy's all afraid of like, oh, I'm gonna miss my daughter's everything in her life, and he end up being like younger than his daughter by the time he gets back to Earth. Regardless. This effect is greatest in black holes because they're the thing we know to have the strongest gravitational pull. For instance, their pull is so strong not even light can escape. In theory, you can be dropped in a black hole and time will move so slowly around you that you'll actually outlive the heat death in the universe. So in effect, you're kind of traveling into the future because you're kind of experiencing time slower than people outside of you. In conclusion, time travel into the future may not be really sexy, but it can exist. But what about time travel into the past? Well, one, theory revolves around the use of wormholes. Imagine space as a piece of paper. If you bend the paper so both ends touch each other, you can stick a pencil through and make a shortcut between the two ends. This can also theoretically happen in space. The shortcut is called a wormhole. It allows you to travel quicker from point A to point B without having to take the really long way around. And if we find a wormhole, we can technically create a form of time machine to go backwards in time. This is how it works. So, imagine you have a wormhole. Now there are two ways of going somewhere. Either the quick way through the wormhole, or the slow, longer way not using the wormhole. However, what happens if, at the beginning of the wormhole, so the entrance, you place a neutrino star, which we know has a strong gravitational pull, so it makes time pass slower for people on that star. Then, because time moves slower from that star, if you travel through the wormhole, you would be technically traveling from the future to the past. So simply put, instead of both the start and end point of the wormhole being at the same time, the start point would now be ahead in time of the end point. So technically, you're traveling from the future into the present, but the present would then be the past, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's time travel. It's supposed to be confusing, right? And in theory, if you're even fast enough, you can now travel the long way around and see yourself enter the wormhole. And voila, it's a time machine.
Yeah, but it's very, very marginal, that little bit of time travel that you do. It's not going to be you're not going to be able to actually go the long way around and see yourself. It's more like if you could teleport.
Well, as new.
Well, actually,
I'm rearing up for this.
Glasses.
Have you guys seen Ant-Man movie, right?
Yeah. With the quantum realm. And
yes.
Yeah,
it goes subatomic or whatever they say. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a stupid superhero slogan. But anyways, I guess so.
Is it?
Yeah, regardless. The thing is, you can get a wormhole in space, right? That's what they say. But you can also kind of create wormholes by going subatomic, because there's certain subatomic particles which act really weird. That's all I'm going to say on it. And which some people hypothesize are kind of wormhole-like in properties. And this is something that is kind of also in Einstein's theory of relativity, as well as other modern theoretical theorists also believe this. So the thinking is, let's say we go to CERN in Switzerland, and the lectures I've watched have said this verbatim pretty much. So I am speaking through their words, not mine. And you take that Large Hadron Collider, right? We all know what I'm talking about. And you shoot around these subatomic particles and you eventually create this stuff, which is like a little wormhole-like thing. Right now we can kind of create them, but they go away in microseconds, and they're really tiny. If you can isolate one of these small wormholes, pump energy into it, make it bigger, and contain it, voila, you have a wormhole, and then you can screw on the time of it. So theoretically, that's how you make a time machine.
I do want to put the asterisk here. So I don't know that much about theoretical physics. In fact, I don't know anything about theoretical physics, but I'm pretty sure that quantum physics and theory of relativity are not the best of pals, and they're a very big debate is how to fix those two up.
Yeah, you can put the asterisks on there. I'm not going to defend any because I will inevitably get it wrong. But from the lectures I've been listening to for the past week or two, you can create these small wormhole-like kind of particles or properties, and in theory, you can blow them up and create wormholes, and then you can use them to do stuff, is the thinking.
Right.
So don't quote me on it, but if we do create a wormhole, I genuinely believe, or a time machine, I genuinely believe CERN in Switzerland, France, will hold the key to that because they're doing this kind of research.
We don't want to give the French a way to travel through time, though. That would be terrible.
Oh, God.
You know what
guillotine everyone.
No, they would go back and just make sure that every war they ever lost, they will win. That's the French thing to do. So Quebec is going to be French. Canada is going to be French. Everything's going to be French.
Oh.
We talked about your hatred for France last week.
That was fleeting in a moment of desperation, but
fleeting.
I've reformed to now merely dislike some aspects of the French,
right?
And there's an asterisk of that. So,
but you're gonna have to agree with me that if there's such a thing as time travel, we don't want to give them to the French.
I wholeheartedly agree with this. I think definitely the Canadians should be first, and then the Dutch, excluding
Oh God, no! That's both terrible. Let's just give it to some kind of nice place that doesn't do that much bad things, like
I think we should give it to Austria.
Switzerland.
Austria?
Let's give it to
No,
Let's
not
give
the
it to
Austrians.
Switzerland.
Or,
It is.
well,
I mean,
don't
so
give it to Switzerland either. They're so easily bought out by gold.
Nazi
Anyways,
gold.
By gold. I like that.
I don't know. Regardless, I should move on with this. My main point of this whole presentation of what we're talking about so far is that there's nothing fundamentally in physics which prevents time travel as we know it, and some people can think about making time machines. So yeah, how much do we believe in time travel now? Have I convinced anybody more or less?
I'll start off. So you've not really convinced me, because I feel like we're glossing over a bunch of debate that I don't know what it is exactly, but I do know it's there, and I'm pretty sure that you can't just be like quantum physics is gonna and general relativity and then time travel.
I will say I want to do this in 20 minutes, and I'm trying to do it properly. My main point, fundamentally, there's nothing in physics, theoretical physics as we know it, which prevents time travel. That's what we take away from it, right? And this time machine I made with a wormhole and a neutron star seems pretty cool.
It is cool. It's definitely following the rule of cool.
And the rule of cool is always correct. Yes.
Yeah.
You say that with so much conviction, Matt.
Hey, I mean, I am very familiar with the rule of cool. If it sounds cool and it looks cool and it acts cool, then it's real. But I mean, to me, I think I like the subatomic wormhole one better, just because we can sort of, kind of, maybe not quite, almost do it. But I'm always a big fan of like narrowing the suspension of disbelief in order to make things a reality. And I feel like with CERN, we always get so close to that. Like, the next blockbuster sci-fi movie could be someone isolates the wormhole and pumps it full of energy, and they can't contain it, and causes a time-dimensional rift in our world. It's like, we've gone from like giant gorillas on Chrysler buildings in the 50s to a small suspension of disbelief that one scientist could rip through time and space at CERN. That I think that one is, definitely feasible. Neutron star is a bit tricky. It sounds cool, but also like it's a lot easier to chalk something up to throwing particles together than it is to, and here's a neutron star and you can sort of time travel. So that's my
just pull it out of your pocket, just right there. But I'll just say that everything like this sounds like it's been done on at least one episode of Star Trek. At least one episode of Star Trek.
That's like the Simpsons paradox. They've done everything at least once too. It's like,
when it comes to sci-fi, Star Trek has probably done everything.
Okay, whatever. But regardless,
keep going.
Time travel.
We accept it. We accept it. Move on.
That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted to hear in my life. So we're going to move on now to look at some time travelers. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
Do you believe in time travelers? They
I love time traveling.
I'll hit you with like I have 3 cases. The John Titor one, it's going to be last. I have a few quick hits to get to start it off. And it'd be cool to do like an entire episode on like time slips and stuff and ghost trains. I'm obsessed about ghost trains now. I've been trying to mention this to you, Han. We should do an episode on ghost trains.
I feel like
ghost trains are cool. I like trains in general. Anything that involves trains and media is just really neat. So ghost trains, it's like another level.
Yeah,
I like ghosts and I like trains.
Trains are
exactly.
Sweet. Anyways, I feel a picture. It's a picture of New York Times Square, 1951. Cool place. You guys ever been to New York? Times Square?
I have not.
I haven't either. I'm just making conversation, but good for you, Matt.
I love
Did you
Times
know,
Square.
Matt?
Yeah.
A time traveler apparently appeared there.
That's interesting.
That's all you have to say. Okay. Well,
I'm intrigued.
I'll go with the story. It's June 1951. The streets are bustling, and New York is ripping through, and high tide, busy city. Witnesses say suddenly they saw a young man seemingly materializing out of nowhere, late 20s, they say, just walking around, looking completely lost. What they noticed about him, he seemed completely out of fashion, out of date. His hairstyle was from what they said 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. His clothes were Victorian era. He had mutton chop sideburns. Who has mutton chop sideburns in the 1950s? No one. And so He walked around startled, and people were like, what the hell are you doing? Because he looked completely phased out of this element. And he got hit by a car a minute later and died. So, this unfortunate accident made quite a buzz at the coroner's office because they didn't know who he was. They looked at what he had on him. So on him, he had, first off, a medal for finishing third in a three-legged race, instantly suspicious. A second belonging he had was a token for a 5-cent beer for a pub nobody knew about. Doesn't seem very 1950s era to me. He also had a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, which was not a common mode of transportation in the 1950s. And $70 in old banknotes. And he had business cards identifying him as one Dr. Rudolph Fentz. And finally, in his possession was a letter that was sent to his address that was listed on his business card, dated June 1876. What are you guys thinking of this case so far?
Well, before you started listing what was in his pockets, I thought he was going to be off of like a Broadway production of like Oklahoma or something.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because they noted like nothing that he was wearing seemed like it was aged in such a sense. It was literally just, it's like if they took it from that era and placed in that time. So what happened is that New York missing people's there's a detective got on the case, and he's like, we need to find out what happened here. So he finally finds the name Rudolph Fentz Jr. in a telephone book. Nothing else matched this guy. He had no fingerprints, nothing on file. So in a 20-year-old telephone book, he finds the name Rudolph Fentz Jr. He goes to visit the guy. Turns out the guy's dead. Died 5 years ago. Goes to visit his widow, living in Florida, as all widows do nowadays. And
they do.
Yes. Anyways, she's like, oh, yeah, my dear Rudolph Fentz Jr., he died. What about his father? Oh, his father mysteriously disappeared one day in 1876, age 29 years old. Nobody's seen him from that day. Allegedly, I couldn't verify this too much, but some other accounts had him drinking with his buddies, stepping on the street, and just disappearing randomly.
I mean, that happened to me once too when I was drinking.
And you ended up 80 years in the future?
Well, I did end up in the future, like 8 hours.
Sure. Yeah. Anyways, the final smoking gun was that his description of the guy who got hit by the car matched exactly the missing persons report for Rudolph Fentz from the 1876 era. So, do we think this man was a time traveler? An unfortunate man just hang out with his friends in the wrong place, the wrong time, and then got transported and grotesquely met his death by a car, which seems ironically funny to some extent.
I mean,
seems like it came from a movie.
Yeah. The thing with this is that I know how much weird shit is believed to have happened in the US. Like, people believe that the rapture is happening every 5 years or so. So just the fact that it's happened in America makes it so much less plausible for me. If this was Amsterdam, then yes, I'd be on board. But
I think for me, the way you laid out all the time theory stuff doesn't make this plausible for me, because like one thing involves us smashing subatomic particles together, which I do not think they were doing in the 1870s, and the other one involves the power of a neutron star, which would most likely alter like the atmosphere or the skyline around us at the very least. So that's kind of why I'm like not necessarily plausible. Also, some people are just really sick, and if it's really easy to find this missing persons report from the 1870s, someone could have just been like, I'm going to pretend to impersonate this guy, wind up in the middle of New York. Maybe they're crazy, and maybe them getting hit by a car was unintentional. Maybe it was intentional. Who knows? But especially in America, like some people are just really weird.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to like
fully agree.
Yeah, I'm not. This one isn't believable to me. I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what if we do a similar story, but this time with an Italian theoretical physicist?
Instantly more plausible. Go on.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. This man, if you've heard of him, Ettore Majorano. I'm hoping I'm saying his name correct. Born 1906 in Sicily. By the 1930s, he was recognized as one of the eminent rising scholars of theoretical physics. His work was especially notable in the work on subatomic particles and antiparticles, so different kinds of interaction of particles. he actually discovered the neutron in a cell or something, or like figured out what it was for, except he didn't want to take the credit. So the Nobel Prize got handed to some other guy instead of him. So pretty humble guy, but Anyway, to speak to his brilliance, have you guys heard of Enrico Fermi?
Yes.
He was basically the father of the modern nuclear bomb, a very notable physicist. I read some weird fact, or a cool fact actually, that I think he had mentored, I think, 10 or 12 different Nobel Prize winning physicists, which is a pretty impressive repertoire. Anyways, he said of Ettore Majorano, our beautiful friend here, there are several categories of scientists in the world. Those of second or third rank do their best, but never get very far. Then there's the first rank, who make important discoveries fundamental to scientific progress. But then there are the geniuses, like Galileo and Newton. Majorano was one of these. So held in very high esteem. High esteem enough, though, that we haven't heard of him today, because he went missing. In March 17, 1938, the man withdrew all his money from his bank and boarded a ship from Palermo to Naples, but was never seen again. Some say it might have been suicide, some say he joined a monastery, some blamed a mob, some blamed the British SS. This was around the war anyways.
The British SS?
Yes, that's some weird theory that apparently he was
You
getting...
mean the SAS or the
Secret
Oh,
Service.
you mean the Secret Services?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking, is this like a German-British hybrid theory that we're having running in the background here?
Yeah. Anyways, I have another Enrico Fermi quote about him, about his disappearance actually. Enrico said, Ettore was too intelligent. If he decided to disappear, no one will be able to find him, not in this time or another. Exact quote from him.
I feel like, so was Fermi perhaps known as a shit stirrer? Because
I don't think so.
He's messing around.
Okay, so also, Han, do you want to describe the two pictures on the screen?
Yes, so on the left we see a very nice old mugshot of an Italian dude, I think. It looks quite Italian.
Yeah.
He's wearing a suit, he's got a nice little haircut.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right we see two men wearing sunglasses, and it's a pretty vague, blurry picture.
Yeah. The guy on the left, he's the same guy as the one in the picture, right?
Is he?
I mean, look at it. What do you think, Matt?
I don't think so. I think the guy on the left looks a little bit too American, a little bit too white, personally. But that's just me.
Allegedly, he is, and this picture on the right was taken in 1955. So there was this one guy who was in Argentina or Venezuela, depending on the story, and he was on a boat and he met the famed physicist Ettore Majorano, who died years ago apparently, or disappeared. Except, amazingly, he hadn't aged one day. So this picture, however, is somewhat supported because a bunch of people came together and analyzed it, so actual scientists, and they proved that there were 10 points of similarity between this picture and the older pictures of Majorano before he disappeared. So they said conclusively, this man in the picture is the same as Majorano. But what was he doing in a different continent, looking not a day older than the day he disappeared 20 years ago?
I like the lines. I'm happy you brought back the lines. So for the viewers out there, there's a few pictures and there's some lines over it. And I mean, these lines are pretty accurate, I gotta say. I gotta hand it to you, Simon. You found some pretty accurate lines this time.
Thank you. Yeah, basically, same guy, they say, but doesn't look older. How do we explain this? How do we explain the theoretical physicist who was gonna win a Nobel Prize one day, working on subatomic particles, which you yourself, Matt, had said hold the key to time travel? Yeah. I'm paraphrasing, but is this not somewhat of a coincidence, or is there some truth behind it?
Well, I'll just go ahead and say this was the 1930s. We hadn't even invented the computer for 10 years, and that was just one big room for a few kilobytes. I don't think he would be able to build a Hadron Collider back then, let alone on his own secretly.
My only gripe is that this is from the 1930s, right?
Yeah.
But there's an insurmountable amount of reasons why someone would take out all their money and run away in the 30s, especially if you're a high-profile theoretical physicist.
Especially if you're in Italy in the 1930s, because Italy wasn't the nicest place to be at that time.
Yeah.
I would
Now,
disappear.
in terms of age, I think it's really hard based on the photo quality to discern whether he has aged or not. Like quality is not that great, and like most of his face is like blanked out. Like the contrast is so bad. Like I can't even tell if there's wrinkles or lack thereof.
Right.
So I think it's still a little bit tricky.
You guys are
just wearing the same suit. You know,
too used to modern technology here. You got to appreciate what the forefathers did.
Yes, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
I will admit, this one is a bit. The thing that's interesting is that he reappeared and looked very similar. That's the thing that caught me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was Italy. There were some rumors, and I will stress rumors for legal purposes, unless this guy comes out of the void and like starts suing me, that he was a sympathizer of like the Mussolini government or the Nazi government, and the British kind of offed him with their SS. And there were also rumors he was involved in the mob. Others said he wanted to live a peaceful life and join a monastery. Others said it was just suicide. So there are different causes, crazy. But this is the sexiest cause of all of it.
Yeah. We were talking about Occam's razor and the easiest answer first. I think it's very plausible that he just up and took all his shit and went to South America, because a lot of people did that at the time.
Maybe, but I think the easiest answer is that he managed to isolate some subatomic particles in his lab, solder some potential there, dropped the vial accidentally, and got teleported 20 years into the future.
He dropped a vial accidentally as well. That's such a cliche.
It happens, Han. It happens.
If that was true, like, what a comic book way.
Yeah,
to travel through time.
I'm pretty sure he didn't travel through time once. It's his superpower now. He's a man out of time.
He inhaled the Zeta radiation and then became a time traveling Hulk. Yeah. Not Gamma, Zeta. Zeta's the time traveling one, very clearly, right? So
of course, I know what you're talking about.
The Gamma one turns green. So,
speaking of men out of time, you told me, Han, you're not going to let me ramble on for too long because we still have to get to John Titor.
I did let you ramble on for too long. I'm sorry. I was too engrossed in your tale.
Yeah, but this is going to be a long episode because we still have to get to John Titor, who is the era-defining time traveler. Unfortunately, we don't have a picture of John Titor. So basically, the John Titor story, it starts in 1998. So there's this guy, Art Bell. He has this radio show called Coast to Coast AM. Basically, he deals with a lot of like mysterious like stuff, like, you know, gets a lot of callers from people who met aliens, time travelers, etc., etc. Anyways, one day he gets a fax from this one guy. He doesn't name himself yet, but he's like, "Yo, Art, my man, I love listening to your show and stuff. But the issue is, you have people on here who claim to be time travelers from past year 2500 AD. That's simply not possible. The reason I know this is because time travel was invented in 2034 by some scientists working at CERN in Switzerland. They made the world's first contained singularity engine, which you can use to travel backwards and forwards in time. I'm actually a time traveler. I ended up here. I'm on assignment. And we discovered that you can't travel back past 2500. So we're trying to do some work to kind of figure that stuff out." And then he went on to say a few things about his life and stuff. So he called in, I think, one more time or like sent another fax. And then in 2000, and between 2000 and 2001, he joined an internet forum where, just for fun, he said, or just because he liked interacting with people at different times, he started sharing some information. It was basically an open AMA, like Reddit does nowadays, except with a time traveler. And he provided a lot of accurate information about his time machine. He shared pictures. He showed all his processes, etc., etc., etc. Made some predictions too. What, Han, would you like to know from the time traveler who now identified himself as John Titor?
Well, I'd like to know why the first thing he did was fact check a random radio program. I feel like that's the last thing I would do if I were to travel in the past. But
some people are just like that, you know. Some people, like he actually expressed within these posts. I spent most of the day reading through them. There's a lot. It's worth a look if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But he was like, I do enjoy listening to this kind of media and like more like the conspiratorial stuff and like aliens, UFO kind of things, because back in 2036, they actually don't know anything about UFOs either, or crop circles, any of this kind of stuff. It's still a mystery to them. Like some of them are thinking now that they've discovered time travel, that's actually just time travelers in the future looking at them or something like that. So it's a hobby of his, basically. And I think one day maybe he was a bit drunk or something. He's like, there's no way you can keep doing this or something.
You can't keep getting away with this. These time traveling inconsistencies are too much.
Yeah,
exactly. He's just gatekeeping time traveling.
Honestly, maybe that's what gives us credence. Like, knowing how humans work, if someone had come back in time from the future, of course they would want to gatekeep time travel. Yeah, I'm actually a time traveler, and this is how it's supposed to work, and you guys can't be because I'm from the future.
It's petty and it's ridiculous, but the fact that it's so ridiculous that it doesn't even fit in a proper story makes it slightly more believable, I suppose.
Pettiness above all. Listen, if you're making a conspiracy theory, always aim to be petty because no one will believe you otherwise. I think that's just the golden rule we've learned.
I'll take that to heart. Well, anyways, Han, I thought your first question would be, what does this time machine look like? Because that was what most people in the forum was saying. And John Titor, our friend over here, was more than willing to supply some information. He even, Han, if you believe this, supplied some images. Have you seen these images, Matt?
Yes, they're in the game that I was talking about earlier.
Are you actually? Okay.
Yeah. At least from what I understand.
So this time machine, it looks like this. It's a bit of a box. Basically, how it works is that within it, two microsingularities that manipulate gravity. So using, I think, the subatomic particles we were talking about earlier, these are manipulated by ejecting more electrons, and based on the spin of how they spin, you can travel forwards and backwards in time. This is not a small machine. I believe it weighs around 500 pounds and can travel up to 3 people plus equipment at a time in like the field around it.
Interesting.
The issue, though, is that it's not completely precise because it's still pretty new technology for him. As he was saying, it was invented in 2034 by researchers at CERN. This model is one owned by the US government. He was using it because he's actually in the army. And the year he traveled back from was 2036. So basically what you can only, he said, travel like concretely around 60 years or so before like the technology gets a bit too wobbly. It's not as stable anymore. Some people, the scary thing that he was saying is some people have traveled back further or forward further. So I think some people traveled forward to like 2,500, but they discovered in any time when they travel forward, you can't get past 2,500. It's just a blank void, basically. You can't do anything. He said they were trying to isolate the cause of this happening, why there's no time past 2,500. They say something happened in 2000. It doesn't really get elaborated on too much in the story. And he's back there not for that reason, for a different reason, which we'll get about a bit later.
Was it Y2K? Is that it?
I don't believe so. The reason he's back is semi-Y2K related. I'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
So yeah, basically, this is his time machine. Han, do you want to describe the time machine?
Well, I don't really have a good gauge of how big it is, but it kind of looks like a fridge or a really big, long, drawn-out tools chest or something. Yeah. With I can't really see what it is. It's got like a wire on the side of it, and it's got all kinds of bibs and bobs on the inside, and like a thing. I don't know. It's kind of weird looking. It's also not a very precise picture.
But we have he actually provided some of the diagrams from the owner's manual or the operating manual, which is funny to have.
They made an operating manual for this. I love that. That's so funny.
That is so good.
I bet they have an operating manual for like the F-32 fighter jet. It's like, come on, you need one for a time machine as well.
Yeah, but it just feels like he's got this IKEA guide or something to rebuild it if it somehow breaks.
Okay, on the topic of IKEA, do you know who made this?
IKEA?
No, General Electric. So it was built in partnership with General Electric and CERN.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. GE.
Yeah. It's model C204.
Okay, this theory has now become less believable because I don't think GE has the expertise to build these things.
Yet?
Yes.
Well, come on, it could all change, Matt. It could all change.
Their fridges are anything to go by. I sincerely doubt their build quality, but GE, if you're hiring me in the future, I apologize for this podcast, but unless you improve the quality of your fridges, I don't really have a desire to work for you. So this is my disclosure now.
But maybe this will win you over too, for both of you. He provided, there's some more pictures from the owner's manual, but he provided images of it in his car. He traveled in a car. So, Back to the Future references here.
Very nice.
Yeah.
It was a truck, right?
Yes, it was a Chevy truck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So American.
Allegedly, what he did is every timeline he'd travel to, he would have to leave it behind and go buy a new era-specific car because the thing is too heavy to kind of take out. But it kind of works. And when you're using it, he does say you need to use like oxygen mask. It gets really warm. So basically, what happens is it takes about, I think what he said, about an hour to travel 10 years into the past or into the future. How is this going for you, Han? How much are you believing this? Or you too, Matt? How is it going?
I'm just struggling because I mean, obviously we're going to get to that. Well, how does his concept of time work? If you can just travel back into time, what does doing anything in the past really do? I guess, like you said, it's going to be more of an alternative universes kind of thing, where if you kill Hitler in another timeline and you go back to yours, then nothing changed there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Matt touched upon it briefly when he was discussing what he was going to say about the theory. But what turned out to be true in theoretical physics is that the multiverse interpretation of how the world works turned out to be the right one, because you are situated on one timeline, basically. And when you go time travel, you kind of exit that timeline and re-enter a different one. So any world he kind of comes into, it's not really his home world, right? It's just a different kind of branching or version of the multiverse universe, I guess, if you can call it that way. So any action he does in our universe, like telling us that he does exist, that this does go forward, that can have some rippling effects in our universe, but it's not going to affect his own timeline because he'll eventually travel back to his own timeline. Additionally, he says that there's about a 2.5% divergence between each world from what he's noted. So this can take the form of some cars being a little different, some events playing out differently, etc., etc., etc. Oh, yes, and the other cool thing about it being a multiverse interpretation of the universe is that he says to get back to your own timeline. I'm sure this is the question you're wondering about. It's actually quite straightforward. You just time travel right back until I think a few seconds before you time travel into the past or the future. So basically, you time travel before you time travel. The one issue with that, or one of the cool things, is that you actually meet yourself quite frequently, he says. So whenever you use it, you time travel right before you're going to time travel in the first place. So you travel back to that moment, you're back on the right timeline, and just wave yourself goodbye, basically.
I'm struggling. I am struggling with this because it feels like if you're going back to the past, and with that same mechanic, then you're going into the future again to return to your own timeline. Yeah. Wouldn't that just end you up, like, what would stop you from ending up in the exact same time in a different timeline? What makes sure that that is your timeline and not just some random one? Like, what's tethering you to your own timeline?
It's a good question. I believe he has some like clocks and stuff on board. I'm pretty sure John can explain this a bit better than I can.
And here it is.
Yeah, and here's John. Yeah.
I do have a question though.
Go for it, Matt.
It's the second photo.
Yeah.
It's a picture of the car with the driving, right? It's where you would drive. Does John attest that this car was bought in America? Like, he's in America, right? I'm assuming he bought this car in America too, right?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I didn't. There's a lot of text out there, but just
because it looks like in this photo, the driving wheel is on the right side, not on the left side. And as a Canadian who also, I think we all drive on the left side of the road and are still on the left side of the car. It appears, by virtue of the angle of this photo, that the wheel's on the right side. So I find that very interesting.
Wait, which photo do you see that on?
So the rightmost photo with the driving wheel poking out. Just looking at the angle of how the photo is taken, it appears that it's the right side of the car.
The rightmost.
To me, it looks like it's on the left side, and they just kind of took out the right seat and put the machine instead of.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I guess maybe because the box is so slender, but maybe if it's wide enough, then you could. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'm going to concede on that.
Mm-hmm. So a bit about John himself. So basically, he was born in 1998, so he could be listening to us today. So hi, John, if you're listening, feel free to call in someday. I'd love to receive a fax from you. My dad still has an operating fax machine just for you.
All right.
Anyways, his universe played out a bit different than ours, or his life, basically. In 2004, a civil war broke out in America, he said, or the beginnings of a civil war. It doesn't seem too likely in our timeline from what it's looking like, but a lot of what he was saying with the Civil War seems eerily similar to what's going on nowadays, kind of in America. So what he says, and quote, he says, I would describe it as a Waco type event every month that steadily gets worse. And eventually that led to full-blown conflict between different sections in America. So conflict, I guess, basically started becoming a daily occurrence in 2012, and it led to a short World War III in 2015. This ended up with actually Russia, I think, attacking several American cities, or the city people, I guess that faction was. And that resulted in basically everything being kind of reset in a sense, and eventually America coming back together, but it was a much more community-focused kind of way of living. More rural, more focused on community values and, just forming those relationships with people. Anyways, John was in the army for a while. He fought during this war. He was still pretty young at the time, which is interesting. But, war is not a good thing to experience, however theoretical it may be.
Like, he's going to be 17 when the war breaks out, like 16, 17. So that's young.
Yeah, he was quite young.
Crazy.
Some people say it's unbelievable, but, I mean, war itself is not the greatest situation to be caught up in. So I'm not going to critique his war experiences. He eventually worked up and he got assigned to this time travel unit, basically. So what they used the time travel technology for the short amount of time they've had it, beyond just testing it out, they use it a lot to repair the environmental and kind of damage that's been caused by the war, to kind of regain technologies they might no longer have and stuff like that. So one of the most devastating things that happened was there was a huge EMP type like blast, which fried electronics on a lot of their computers during the time. So this led to a bit of an issue, and that's why John ended up back in our timeline. What he was searching for, I'll flip it to a picture of it, was this computer, an IBM 5100. Have you ever used one of these?
I definitely haven't. I think my mom might have, because she's been working on IT since the 80s, so maybe I should ask her.
Really? I'm surprised, because this thing built in 1975, I think it retailed for, $10,000, $15,000 at the time.
Oh, right. Well, in that case, no. Not even my mom.
Have you ever seen one, Matt?
I think like in like a museum or something of like the first computers, like how small they're getting. I think this was one of them. So.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason they wanted this computer is because it has this really cool hidden feature, which nobody knew about, even at the time John was making his post. So this is one of the things most people believed him to, or well, not most people, but what really attributed his believability is that he said he wanted this computer because he alleged it contained a unique feature. So basically, if you know how coding works and stuff, most modern coding systems are built on the Unix system of coding. This computer kind of allowed you to easily translate between old IBM code, APL, BASIC, and Unix. So he wanted to bring one of these computers back with a few tweaks from some of the original engineers to 2036, because what was happening or coming to happen was what is known as the year 2038 problem. This is a real thing in the world, by the way. So the year 2038 problem is kind of like Y2K, where the programming kind of like the bit things. So it only goes up to 32 bits. The date is stored in a 32-bit binary, meaning there's 32 different like number things that they can use. However, it resets once it hits the year 2038 on a specific date, because that's how far it goes into the future to date. Once that happens, all the old legacy systems and like old unupdated systems kind of don't do too well. They kind of crash. And this is a real thing in our world too. So he needed that old 1975 computer to translate, I guess, some kind of patch or some way to upgrade those systems to like a 64-bit kind of operating system, because all the other IBMs in his world, especially from that time, were destroyed by the EMP blast that the Russians did. And this was officially confirmed to be a feature of that IBM model by IBM engineers in 2004 or 5 or something like that, after John Titor's posts.
But if they already had the schematics for this, which I'm assuming they would, because it's still like 1976, like it's still not that old. Why wouldn't they? Why, like, even if an EMP blast destroyed all of them, like, or render them inoperable, couldn't you just manufacture another one?
I guess they also, I think, switched a lot of their kind of operating techniques and stuff like that, and maybe some of the coding, like just even like how to code that feature. It wasn't known to the public. I don't think you could find like a manual how to create it that easily.
Well,
I think it was honestly probably just easy to go back in time since you have this time machine now. Grab an old machine and bring it back a few.
I mean, 1975 isn't that long ago, and in 2035 there would still be IBM engineers alive, I guess, that could have done it, unless they all died.
There would be like 120.
Nah, I mean, if it was built in this, it was built in the mid 70s, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're mid 30s or something, because I mean, you didn't have that. Software engineering is generally something that was not for older people back then either.
Mm-hmm.
It's not less even more so now. But I mean, let's say you were like 30 or 35 then.
Yeah.
That means you would be pretty damn old, but you'd like they'd still be alive. I think they'd still be alive. At least one or two people
The Great
know how to
World
do this.
War III event killed off a great amount of people as well.
That is true.
So, I don't know. It seemed believable just because for me, the thing is they didn't know about this thing, like this hidden feature, until it was confirmed by IBM after the John Titor posts.
The only other like part of this is, well, one, why is there a reliance on? Well, I guess you're saying, right. So most programs are still based on Unix, right? And then you have 2030. Yeah, I guess my only problem would be like, I feel like that far in the future, we would have either surpassed the need or had something more developed than Unix, or we would have already addressed and solved this problem to prevent the whole political hubbub of Y2K. I feel like we would have learned our lesson from Y2K. But secondly, like another fairly, fair feature would be maybe this whole thing was developed by someone who worked at IBM as a software engineer, because they would most certainly know about this feature. So,
maybe
that's just me.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, if someone's going to do this whole shebang about being a time traveler, it's got to be some kind of nerd.
Like someone has put a lot of thought into this. Even the whole like needing oxygen masks to like travel through time and stuff. Like sci-fi romanticizes the idea of time travel and exaggerates the issues with it. Whereas if someone was trying to realistically portray that, they would work in like small details, like, hey, you can't breathe while doing your time travel-liness because the air around you becomes vaporized. Like stuff like that is, I think, such a fine attention to detail that you could like if you're trying to make this believable, you would address things like that. I think so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, what really appeals to me about this case is I have this as like one thing I want to say in conclusion, but I'll say it now.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to predict how time travel would look and how it would be operated, this is how I think it would be done. Because it makes sense considering what we know about science, what we know about where it most likely will happen, and just shrinking it down, vehicle size, big box like that. It just makes sense. It seems like if I'm going to meet a time traveler, this is probably what it'll look like in some dirty Chevy truck.
Yeah. I think there's quite a few more warning signs. Like one of the things that I don't know if John alleges this or not, but like I don't know if the way that he describes his time machine is something of a prototype or like something that is refined in its design for like military use. Because there's like two different, right? Like there's prototype versions of things that get used in testing, and then there are finalized versions, even if they're like one of five. And this feels like a little bit too well made. Like adding warning signs and stickers, like this feels less like a prototype, more like a finished product. So yeah,
I believe that was the one thing while I was reading through everything.
Yeah,
it did stick out to me that he alleged the first prototypes were developed in 2034. And that this was more of like a finalized model, like they had an owner's manual. Come on, but
right, yeah,
but
exactly.
I did think that the time between a prototype and like an actual working model was pretty quick. But then again, I feel like the military works a lot quicker than we realize with all like their stealth operations, everything like that. But he did say
as soon as
really quickly, he did say he thought or he predicted that like commercial time travel for like people would start coming in like 2040, 2050, he said.
So yeah, I mean, so I agree with your point that the military works quicker as long as they like. I still think time is short because you would have to prove to the military that this time travel thing is legit and effective. Then once they realize, oh, this is cool and neat, and we'll use this for wars and stuff, they'll have to throw a lot of money at it. And I don't know if the time between throwing a lot of money at it and having a finalized product would be in that case. One of the things I think is neat, though, which you already talked about, is the whole General Electric thing. I do firmly assert that they would probably go to a private company for its construction because they know private companies have a lot of big R&D budgets that are more than governments and would do that. So like on the whole point of like commercial space travel, as we all know, the great Bezoses and Bransons of our time are at the forefront of commercialized space travel because they simply just wanted to go to space. And I also firmly believe that we probably wouldn't have gotten there as quickly as we did if we relied on the government to do that because they have the money and resources to do that anyway. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's fairly plausible, but I also feel like that was like still a very common thing, even like during the space race, like major corporations were funding that as well and contributing to its, eventual victory, which is still fiercely debated. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a fairly consistent point. So, okay, sure. Yeah.
So one point I'll just throw in is that I think even if you had a fully working unit, it wouldn't look like this, not in such a short time.
Really?
Yes. Have you ever seen what the first computer looked like? That thing was massive. I think if you build a time machine, then it's going to be huge at first. And it's going to be a process of years and years to like slim it down into a model like this that can actually fit into your car. I mean, that's what I would think. If they built a time machine at CERN, it's going to be like half a building or something worth of Hadron Collider stuff building it.
John did say, kind of on that point, like I get what you mean, Han. I do think he did say in this point, Titor, he did say that the problem was less with how to control gravity and kind of how to do this process, because once they figured out how to do it at CERN, it wasn't that big of an issue. It was more creating the computers, the sensors, the clocks, all the like technical apparatus they needed to operate it in the way that it could be like used by a guy like him.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense, yeah.
But it's interesting how much stuff he said and how much you can kind of explain it with. That's also the thing. Like there's a lot of stuff that he wrote in those blog posts and stuff, or those forum posts. And any final things you would ask a time traveler, and any final things you would ask Mr. Titor here about his case, Han and Matt, before we wrap it up, because we've been going for a little while.
Yeah. You can go ahead, Matt. You can go first.
Honestly, I would probably ask like what the whole geopolitical landscape is, right? And especially around the economy, because I feel like a lot of, not just on his specific, but I think a lot of it hinges on the government still playing a titular role in the governance of society, as well as like financing stuff, right? Like I feel like this wouldn't have been able to happen were it not like very regulated by the military and or the government with help private institutions. So yeah, like the way that we're going now, like everyone's vying for the decentralization of a lot of things. So I'd be really interested to see if in his timeline, decentralization is as big of a topic as it is for us.
It very much is so. From what he writes about, basically after the Civil War, what happened is that America got split into 5 different kind of regions, which then kind of formed more their autonomous units operating under, I guess, the banner of America. And these focused more like individually on their economic and defense-oriented strengths. And within these, it was very much like the way we live now in cities. That's not the life he lives there. It's very much more rural-based, community values-based, because they attributed a lot of what went wrong with the Civil War to just the way governance happened in America at the time. He was even writing, I think in 2020, he wrote that, or like in his year 2020, that they tried to reform the Constitution in America, or amend it completely. But they discovered that it was less the Constitution, but more how leadership was happening. So they kind of tried to redo that. But it's really interesting coming from like a political theory point of view, because it's like, this is kind of feels like where America is slightly heading towards itself, where some kind of reset kind of needs to happen. Because one of the scary things he wrote about that I thought was scary was that some people were asking him, oh, what happened? Don't you want to prevent the great Civil War happening of us here? And he's like, I actually don't, because I think it delivered a lot of positive aspects to how society evolved into. Because he kind of looked back into how people lived in 2000 under the system that he was like visiting as completely not right, as very much not as, I guess, pure as what he was living under.
Interesting.
I love. I mean, just assuming that it's not true, this guy put a lot of effort into his story. I gotta commend it. This
100%.
honestly, a very, very well written work of sci-fi. Just bang on.
Yeah. This is why I love this one, because I want it to be true so much, because I don't know, he seems like a great guy.
I don't know.
On the topic of it being less true. So people started digging after. So the forum post didn't make a huge splash in the general community until like 2003. They got some traction. By that time, Titor had left end of 2001. He said his mission was gone, needed to do some personal stuff. Never really returned. I think the fact he never returned, as a side note, is also somewhat of a helps the story a little, because he got much more well known in the conspiracy community and like the time travel community afterwards. It'd be so easy to do a follow up and like reap the benefits if you were after that. But regardless, in 2003, people started looking into it more, became more popular. Eventually, I think in 2008, investigators, they put literal investigators on this. They found that there was no evidence of a John Titor or a person like that ever existing. However, there was a John Titor Foundation created in 2003 in Florida. Others have linked the IP addresses where he made the first post to Florida, which kind of matches because he was based out of Tampa Bay, Florida. They also found that an entertainment lawyer named Larry Haber owned this IP address, or not the IP address, this foundation. And he had a computer scientist as a brother named Richard. So theoretically, this seems like probably the best route of people who wrote this, but it's never been confirmed by them. But if you're going to ask a skeptic, and I'm going to put it in there because we're conspiracies, but we keep it a bit more realistic, they'd probably say Larry Haber and his brother wrote this tale. In 2018 was the latest link on this, and a multimedia artist named Joseph Matheny claimed that he worked as a creative consultant for unnamed people for this creating this legend. And that was basically all.
I love the fact that they would have a creative consultant to write the story. It's not just a sweaty guy behind his computer. It's just someone with a whole ass team trying to write a proper sci-fi story. Honestly, it does kind of feel like it's been written by people who know what they're doing.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, I think that I was reading about this, or when I was reading this like a while ago, I remember that I think there was one more that asserted that it was the partnership between like an entertainment lawyer and an engineer at IBM that had also crafted this. Like, there's been a number of investigations on this, from what I understand.
Yeah,
which is kind of commendable. It shows just how seriously people took this. Like, and these are the kind of conspiracy theories I like, because it means that like if the government or like private foundations commit resources to this, you know that it's like of interest and potentially of concern to them too. So that's kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, as you were saying earlier, Matt, too, it's kind of harmless in some senses. There's no real like dystopian plot around it. It's like basically even like John Titor's message was like, you people got to live a bit better too, kind of what I was getting the vibe from, because he kind of looked at us like we're still the barbarians in this age. We need to learn how to live a bit better. But yeah.
Yeah, that's something like, and this is fine. Like, no one's waging tyrannical wars of information over this. Like, it's a fun little story, and if it's true, very cool. If it's not, it's harmless. It's not going to kill anyone.
And the image I have up now, please try and describe what this looks like, Han. But it's the coolest image ever. This was apparently a picture of his military emblem for his unit. It's so cool.
I guess it kind of looks like a flower with laser beams shooting out of the middle of it.
Yeah, it's sick.
It also looks like something I'm not going to say.
Like a lotus or something. Yeah.
Just, yeah.
It looks...
But I guess it kind of looks like a flower.
Yeah. I'm trying to... Yeah, I got what you meant the first time on.
Yeah, I cannot see it now.
I didn't put two and two together, but now it does look fairly... What's the best way to put it? Fairly...
Like that.
Yeah. Don't want to say sexual.
Oh, yeah.
What's the opposite of phallic? But yeah.
Yeah. Anatomical.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Nah, just looks cool.
It's anatomically suspect, but I guess that could just be something that wasn't intentional.
Maybe
that might just be.
I just thought it looked
dirty
really cool. Subconsciously.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. I guess we got to wrap it up a little, and we always wrap it up by just saying what we felt about what we talked about today. Did our initial rankings change? what are our thoughts? Go on a little monologue. Matt, do you want to start, or do you want to give Han the honors?
I'll let Han go first.
Come on, Han.
All right. So I think I'll bump it up a bit, because if only out of respect for the story, because it's just so well crafted. They made it as plausible as they could have, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote a really solid story. They covered all their bases. They made sure that it didn't have any egregious holes in it or any like things that are too big that it becomes unbelievable. Like, it's not a Terminator story or something that it's the survival of mankind depends upon it. It's more like, it's an inconvenience that we need to fix. So just moseying up in your timeline and like taking this one thing out by it's a lot less high stakes, which makes it like a very quaint little story. So I'm gonna give it. I'll give it a 6. Yeah, sure.
And I feel like you just kind of want it to be true. And I guess for me personally, I was just saying, I do think this is probably how time travel. If I meet a time traveler, this is probably how it's gonna be like. Not like in a DeLorean zipping past me at 70 kilometers per hour, or this is how it's gonna look.
He's gonna do an AMA on Reddit. Is that what you mean?
Okay. Honestly, I'm not too surprised, because imagine if you're a time traveler, you end up in this year, you're bored one night.
You'd want to tell one about it, yeah.
You'd be like, yo, I'm browsing through Reddit from 20 years ago. Why don't I just do an AMA? And it gets kind of out of hand.
Especially because I feel like you'd be thinking to yourself, like, man, these people like really don't know like what the future's like. Like, man, like these people don't know what time travel is like. And that's why I think like this is fun, because I feel like unintentionally or otherwise, they really captured like how people would react to this. People who like did time travel and knew, like, yeah, there'd be an air of complacency, I think, and may I say superiority. I think it's totally plausible.
Yeah. So where would you rank it, Matt? Do you think your ranking has gone up or down? Because you knew a bit about this going beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's a 3 or 4 before. I remember when I give this like a 4 or 5, mainly because like, one, I think it's constrained by the time that it was conceived in. So like the whole plot of like grabbing an IBM computer to solve 2038 problem and talking about that around the turn of the century just seems like it kind of sort of lines up with the Y2K buzz. And so I would not be surprised if they took that and was like, wow, this was a big deal. What if I made a time conspiracy around that? That just because, computers are like in this new age, like people would sort of take it face value because lack of knowledge. So I think that sort of constrains my like realistic belief in it. But I won't give it a 5 because like it'd be cool if it was true. It'd be cool if it was, real. It's fun to think about. There's, like Khan said, there's no egregious plot holes or suspension. This is what I'm talking about, the whole like reducing your suspension of disbelief to placate reality. Like I think this is one of those things. Like the gap is pretty small. So, it's harmless, it's fun, it's pretty cool, it's very well thought out. This could be like a fan fiction, and you wouldn't like I wouldn't be surprised, right? You know what I mean? Like this is really well done, I think, as a conspiracy. So
yeah, there's been some love put into it.
Oh, 100%.
And his name is just cool. Like, imagine being named John Titor or John Titor or however people say it.
Titor, definitely Titor, not
Really?
Teeter.
And you picked
Teeter sounds Titor. That's cool. Like Titan,
yeah.
Titor.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I feel like we ended very pleased here.
Yeah,
Yes,
this is fun to
I
talk
think we're-
about. So I mean, I'm pleased at this whole shebang. So
Let me just end on a shout out, John. If you're out there, shoot us a line, drop us a line, anything. Just just give us a nice overview on how the political landscape, like the geopolitical landscape, lines up in your time, because I think we'd be really interested in that.
Yeah. Did you know? Okay, fun fact on this one. He even, like, people were kind of stupid, and they're like, yo, can you take me back in time if you in a time machine? And he's like, sure, I don't mind. If you want to come along, I mean, we can set up a meetup sometime. I'll take you, drop you off in 1975. You don't have to come back. I'll leave you behind if you want. Like, he was openly offering that. I was like, seems like a nice guy, yo. But yeah. Anyways, I guess we've traveled through enough time travel theories, but I kind of want to visit back on some of the more wackier, like time, like dilation ones, like the ghost trains. Come on,
Sure.
Ghost trains. Anybody ghost trains? Nobody? Han,
Ghost trains are cool.
we're doing a Ghost Train
Ghost
episode now,
trains are
Han, because I discovered this while doing the research.
Yes, I know you want to do a Ghost Train episode. We'll do a
We'll
Ghost
talk
Train
about
episode.
it. But yeah. Anyways, we'll come back to this topic sometime in the future. Oh, and for sure, Matt, we'll invite you on sometime in the future too when we cycle through our guests. It's been great talking to you again.
Sure.
Seeing you. Stay warm in Canada is all I'll say.
Ideally, yeah, it's been great talking to you as well. This has been fun to do. I don't do many podcasts ever at all, so I think it's the first podcast I've officially been on. But it's fun to talk to people to reconnect. But it's fun to talk about stuff that isn't like work or like school. Like conspiracies are fun to just talk about. So yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Han, do you want to leave us with any final words of wisdom?
I think it just did with my words of wisdom to John Titor.
There we go.
I hope he shows up. I hope he gives us maybe if he wants, he can be our guest for the Ghost Train episode.
Yeah,
it's a bit short notice, John, but just
come on, John.
Ghost
give us
Trains. Who doesn't love Ghost Trains?
You love Ghost Trains, John.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you enjoyed, drop a like, drop a subscription, shoot me an email if you ever want to be on. I have the email too. If you are John Titor, shoot me an email there. It's in the description below. I'm gonna get spammed with so many emails now. Ignore that part. Regardless, see you guys next week. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
See you later, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.